10. It is December 6th, and this is the Education Committee meeting. Here we are in the Cardinal Room. We just had a reorganization meeting of the board. And as a result of that, the board did reorganize, and the Education Committee now consists of Mr. Warschauer as vice president, vice chair, apologies there. It's been already a long night, and English is not my first language, right? But and Dr. Thomas and Mr. Wallach are making, along with myself, Titia Scherpier, we make up the Education Committee but all other board members are, of course, always welcome to join. I'd like to welcome everybody, and I'm going to ask Dr. Smith, for whom this is the first Education Committee meeting. First of all, welcome, but I already welcomed you in the previous one, but we'll do that with the same intent and heartfelt welcome. Do you have any announcements or communications?
I just have one, and I'll keep it brief, but just wanted to share that Mr. Hoffman and I were able to visit some students at the high school this afternoon in the environmental science project-based learning class, and I was thoroughly impressed by their ability to interact with the adults in the room and engage us in conversations and brainstorming around their mission to connect the community of Upper Dublin through progressive practices in one of the most commonly used spaces in their school, which is the cafeteria. And they talked to us about single-use plastic, biophilia, and food waste, and again, just really impressed by how they interacted with us, and excited to continue to work with them. So exciting things going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the meeting minutes, and that were the minutes from last month's meeting where Ms. Ionetti was on the committee, Ms. Davis, and we had an open. Yeah, it was just 3 of us. Yeah, so Dr. Davis, Ms. Ionetti, and myself, so there's just the 2 of us. Do you approve the minutes? So we move them on for information to the legislation committee meeting. That brings us to the main dish of this evening, although at least in the context of the Education Committee meeting, and that's a presentation by Mr. Hoffman, our Chief Academic Officer, and Ms. Poustet, the Director of Teaching and Learning, on data within the district, our students' progress, what we're looking for, what we're aiming for. So, Mr. Hoffman, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you all for your time tonight as we talk through cultivating a culture of learning, responding to data. So those of you who have been on the board or have been tuning in over the years know that we do an annual presentation on our student performance data, and want to remind us that as we work through our goal areas, that we do focus on that Vision 2025 set of goals, that is that all students read at or above grade level by the end of 3rd grade, demonstrate proficiency, at least proficiency in math by 7th, and the writing proficiency by 8th, to really focus that we are eliminating those barriers for all of our students in their educational journey in Upper Dublin. In the past presentations, we've shared with you the focus areas, and if you recall in September, we talked through the idea of cultivating a culture of learning, that learning journey that we believe that hopefully focuses a shift in the discussion from those numbers that we get on an assessment to really a true discussion about learning and accelerating learning for all of our students. Hopefully you'll see that this presentation balances a little bit of what we're used to with the big picture data over the years, but really starts to, on the second half when we pass it over to Ms. Poustet, that you'll see that we're shifting to some tangible examples of what the culture of learning looks like as we shift. And I want to share with you a little bit of our why. So there's a lot of words here on this slide, but it is because we do publish these presentations on our website. And so we don't believe that anybody always goes back to watch the entire presentation. So at least if they do flip through the slides, they can see this. And if you look to the image on the right, I drew the little red line after presented visually, and oftentimes that's where data presentations tend to stop. We start to look at numbers. Ms. Sharpier forwarded us a newspaper clipping the other day of, people look at scores and just make their own story about what those scores might represent without really understanding the context of the district that they're looking at, or really what goes into those numbers that are on that paper. And so our hope is that this presentation is not our annual presentation, but is the first of a series of presentations this year, where we're really going to be talking about being really transparent about areas of focus and how we are responding to that data to cultivate that culture of learning that we're talking about. Each student in each classroom and for every teacher has a journey that we're working through. And hopefully, if we get really good at putting all those pieces together to tell the story, those numbers that we typically report on are going to also be impacted as we go. So to begin, I want to start by thanking our students, our teachers, our staff, our parents, and our community. Tonight, more than ever, I think we remember what a special community we have here in Upper Dublin. And we are really proud and invested in our schools here. And as an example to kind of pose why we're shifting our presentations a little bit, I do want to celebrate that all of our Upper Dublin schools ranked really well in the U.S. News and World Report. You see that our high school is in the top 6, our middle school in the top 3, and all of our elementaries were within the top 17% in the state. What those ratings are based on, as a reminder for everyone, high school has those that are listed there, looking at how are we with our college readiness. So not only looking at our state assessments, but our AP exam performance, both in the participation and in the scoring, our graduation rate, the number of students that take honors and AP courses. And our middle and elementary schools look at 50% for mathematics and reading proficiency. So that's how students do on the actual state assessments. And then the performance piece, U.S. News and World Report looks at what the expectation would be for proportions of students that fall within Black, Hispanic, or from low-income households. So they make a projection on the range that they believe the students would achieve, and then weight the score accordingly to that. So oftentimes we see those scores and think that that is the performance, but there's some other things that go into telling that story. So I'll share with you the actual breakdown that you can see. And this year is actually the first year that they're using this ranking for elementary schools. Fort, just as a special shout out, when you look at that, is number 12 in the state, and they were tied for number 3 in the state in math, which was very exciting. If you've been in any of those classrooms in that building, they love their math, and there's a lot of excitement there. But I would say that math is picking up across the district with our thinking classrooms. But these are some really amazing numbers when you look through what they look like. The numbers that follow, so if you look at the high school, 94.33, that means that Upper Dublin High School ranked higher than 94.33% of the schools across the state. Okay, so that's what those numbers represent. So this takes me to a note about rankings. On the left, you see ESSA participation rate, and that 95% is important because when they start to look at how we report scores, we need to fall within that 95% participation rate, or that starts to impact how the score actually is calculated for a building. So if more than 95%, if less than 95% of our students take the assessment, the number of pass and advance is still calculated out of a minimum of that 95%. So if only 88 people are taking it, we're still dividing that by the 95% that would be required to take that assessment. So when you think of the last couple of years of illnesses, of class quarantines and other things that may impact people to be out for an extended period of time, if you see a dip at a neighboring school in a neighboring district, we don't know what may or may not have happened in that situation. What caused the district to go below that 95%? Who opted out and for what reasons? We don't typically know that, which again is important for us to move our data presentations forward in the way that I was describing. The other piece with US News and World Report that I mentioned based on that performance of those specific subgroups is just the wide range within our own district. So you saw where our elementary schools were, from beginning at 12 with Fort. Our subgroup percentages in those buildings across our 4 elementary schools range at the lowest at 17.2%. Of a diverse population, up to one of our elementary schools with 39.5%. And so that predictability ranking of where we think a school may or may not go could really impact one school that's at almost 40%, very differently than those predictabilities at that 17%. Also wanted to draw your attention on these slides to share with you a little bit about the secondary rankings. So if we were looking and a newspaper wanted to just put out how are people's attendance across the county, you might say, well, Upper Dublin's graduation rate is going down, it's dropping. What you wouldn't know by looking at the 99% versus the 97% this year is the number, last year rather, 2023, is the number of students that stay with us, special education students, after they are 18. We educate those students, but when we keep those students with us, it actually counts against us on those graduation rates. And so that's something that we celebrate in our community because we do take really good care of our students over the years that they can be with us. And that's another thing, though, that you can see that does impact. The other tricky thing with the rankings is that it's all based on senior data. And so some of these assessments and other pieces are happening much earlier in the educational journey of that senior class, but it really doesn't attribute for these rankings until the graduation year. And so if we do notice trends in our schools, which we often do, and we make curriculum changes or we make shifts, or maybe there's other unexpected things of a teacher being on leave, or anything that can happen that can impact someone along their journey, that really is withheld until the senior year for this to be reported. To see that it does take some time for those changes to occur. In 2019, when this ranking was out, Upper Dublin was number 54 in the state by US News and World Report. So from 2019 at 54 down to 31 in just 4 short years is a really nice jump. And some of the things that we've done over that time is opening enrollment in our AP classes, making sure that our classes, that detracking that occurred, and really making sure that those barriers that we mentioned as part of our strategic plan really did ensure that we are having students that are having access to AP and high-level courses. And that's slowly taking effect, as you can see, over time. So those are just some of those intangible things that you don't know when you just look at a number, which is why it's really important, whether we're looking at this data or whether the COVID year when there weren't state assessments, we need to have information about our students along the way. And that's what I'm hoping you'll see as we shift this evening. That being said, we like numbers, we like to know how we did. So we will take a few minutes to review the state and national data before looking more locally. You see this slide every year from us. This is our AP, SAT, and ACT data. What I like to see when I'm looking at this is as we continue to climb out of that 2021 school year, we see more students sitting for exams, we see more exams being given, and we see our increased scores in 3 or more occurring. we have about 70% of our students that actually sit for the exam. So that's important to note as well when you look at our AP data. So this reflects 663 exams given. We actually had 955 seats in all of our AP classes. So it's about 70% of our students. And there's a variety of reasons, as you know, for why they may or may not take those assessments. Some have already reached the limit of how many assessments a college may ask, and some, it's more of the title there. If there are financial impacts, our school works with those students as well. ACT and SAT nationally is kind of fluctuating over the years, and a lot of that's because of the test optional that a lot of schools are going to. So we do see that. I did make a note there for ACT. For a while, it was really popular and was more popular than it had been in many years. But in 2017, we had 125 of our students taking that test. This past year, it was 43. So that really has dipped as well. Oops, I'm pointing this clicker at my computer and it's not doing anything. So one of the things that I was really excited about when I talked with our high school team and high school guidance department was learning more about where we were as a district on AP Honor Roll. AP Honor Roll is something that College Board puts out to recognize schools based on 3 metrics. Those 3 metrics being college culture. So that is looking at and this again is that senior data that I talked about, but the percent of students in the graduating class who at any time in their career took an AP exam. College credit was the percentage who earned a score of 3 or higher, and college optimization is that percent of students who took 5 or more with at least one of those exams in either 9th or 10th grade. Proud to share with the community that Upper Dublin was a silver school. They rank schools as bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. And I think what was very exciting, you have to be all 3 in at least 1. So if you look though, in that college culture piece, we're at 50%. We were at 53% rather, which was in the silver range. But if you look at college credit, that's that score, we actually were gold with 45. Right under that platinum ranking. And then the college optimization, very proud, we had 15%, which is the platinum range. And so what this slide tells us is that when we do make sure that the supports are in place for our students, we do open the doors for students and eliminate those barriers, they can achieve. So the more that we get students with rigorous instruction and support, we do see that success. You've heard me share before that Dr. Webb, Betty Webb always used to remind us that kids can only do as well as what you put in front of them. And when we do open the doors, when you look at that gold and platinum ranking, we know that we're seeing that with our students. And just, I went the wrong way, just for a point of reference, in Pennsylvania, if you work down that 53, 45, 15, in Pennsylvania, the average was 33% for college culture, 21% for college credit, and 5% for college optimization. So we're doing really well when we look at how we perform across the state. Speaking of state, this slide has a lot of numbers on it, and I'll be honing in on a few of these in a few minutes, but these are the scores that look at the statewide performance of our PSSAs. This is not Upper Dublin, this is the entire state and how they do. And if you look in the very last column that says percent proficient and above, so proficient advanced, this is how the various assessments fared in the state. And so when you look at some of the numbers, ELA across the state is in the 50% range. When you look at math, 8th grade being at 26% of students who take the 8th grade PSSA being passed or advanced. When you look at 47% of the 8th grade exam is below basic, which is pretty shocking when you think about those percentages. If we were giving assessments that had these results in our district, we would be looking at our assessments a little bit more closely and really thinking about what's the problem here if our students can't have a higher proficiency here. The state continues to say we have rigorous standards, and that's what we'll say about that at the moment. The next slide will show you that state average. And so that highlighted kind of takes those 3 subject areas and averages all of those assessments from the others. So our PSSA, which is 3rd through 8th grade, for ELA, math, and science have these ratings. The red scores are where we dipped a little bit from last year, and the green scores are where we've increased from last year. So you can see that we do have some areas that we're continuing to make some really great strides in. Every building had increases from this point last year, and at least some of those content areas. And each content areas saw some growth as well. Again, and not to shout out Fort again, but the 100% in science is a real testament to 4th grade at Fort for those assessments. This is how Upper Dublin compares both to our peer districts that we've been using for the past few years, as well as if you look at the chart below, the Montgomery County comparison. So you can see we're just slightly under those averages in each of our content areas for our peer districts, and we're well above the county averages. But again, those numbers only tell us certain parts of the story, right? And when we look at our participation rate on these assessments in our district, the average participation rate for literature on our PSSAs was 96%. Our science was at 92%, and our math was at 88%. So that does have that impact that I was talking through a little bit earlier today. But what are the things that we can control when we look at our data? If you look at the ongoing work that's below that, this year we've been instituting new benchmarks for our students, and Bridget will be talking about that in a little while. We've done a reboot with Ms. Vandergrift with our ELA framework. We're continuing our professional learning around structured literacy and all other components of our literacy instruction. The math vision and standards review and assessments that we've been talking through as part of our math curriculum review has been ongoing. As you know, we're piloting illustrative math in our elementary schools and building thinking classrooms in all of our elementary schools. The board has been very supportive in helping us with the University of Delaware, which our teachers are very appreciative of. The science standards, as you know, the STEELS standards are coming, and we are continuing to look at that as we prioritize what we do in our classrooms. Mrs. Fantini, who for the last few years has been either at the high school or middle school and Robbins Park, this year is at Robbins Park full-time, so that she can continue to support our district with the STEELS implementation and transition. She's doing a lot of that back work for our teachers, staying ahead of that learning, designing some of the new lessons and new activities that we can do with our students, and actually testing some of those in her time at the park with our students. Our U-Design labs are actually coming next week to our elementary schools, and I'll share more about that shortly. But she's also been working through that with us as well, so that she can utilize that space as we think how we teach that science content. When we look at our PSSA standards, I did want to just share the areas of strength and areas of focus for us. And these are the areas of strength across the board. TDAs across our district have been a really strong success for our district. And this year, Ms. Vandergrift and the teachers in 4th grade have actually been working through doing some practice in cold TDAs at the very beginning of the year, so that we're getting really good baseline data on our students in some targeted areas. We'll continue to look at what that looks like for our writing framework moving on. Operations and algebraic thinking is an area of strength. The more that we see that visible learning happening in our classrooms, we're seeing those results. And you can see the areas of focus as well: vocabulary acquisition and use for our ELA. we've been working through word study and some other components of this over the last few years, and I believe that is an area of focus that I'm seeing some nods from Ms. Vandergrift that we're working through this year, and so the data did reflect that when we looked. Geometry is always that topic for us that our teachers always say it's way at the end of our scope and sequence in our Eureka math instruction. And we've looked for ways to be creative about bringing that earlier. And Bridget and I were talking about this the other day, and she said, you know, illustrative math already was addressing area early in the school year, and some of these topics are coming through very seamlessly, and we're excited about the fact that we've already been able to address some of these areas. Keystone data reflects very similarly the PSSA data when you look. The percentage of proficient and advanced across the state being 34.2% on that algebra assessment, 65.3% for literature, and 50% for biology. Where that takes us as a district, we're at 86% for ELA, a combined of 52.2 for Algebra 1 and 68.2 for biology. It's important that these are first-time testers. So through retakes, intervention, remediation, oops, I'm going the opposite way. You'll often see those scores continue to increase. We are seeing across our peer districts and across the state that high school numbers on Algebra 1 do tend to go down, and our middle school numbers are also going down a little bit. And if you think through the why of that, more students are taking the Algebra 1 assessment in middle schools now across the state. So when you have a wider range of students that are taking that assessment, it's not just a small portion of students that were more of an accelerated pathway in the past that were taking it at the middle school. We, as you can see here, had 301 of our students take it last year at the middle school, which is basically a class of students, an entire grade level, with only 91 students at the high school taking it for the first time. This is our peer and county comparison. In addition to what I've already mentioned, the writing framework is absolutely going to help support our continued growth in literature. We're looking at how we can use data analysis and using data to actually drive the instruction and interventions that we have in place. At the secondary level, we have ARP, which is academic resource period in the middle school, and office hours at the high school, which is time that our teachers can spend to support students on very specific and targeted information. The math vision work that I mentioned, the pilot, and the standards is all part of that ongoing as well. One of the things that the state does release as part of the Future Ready is looking at academic growth. You may have heard people talk about PVOS, and we were very proud of all three departments in ELA, math, and algebra that you can see here. They have to answer a question, the state answers a question, did each group of students, so did each subgroup of students make growth in the Keystone content areas? And you can see that our ELA and science exceeded that growth that they were looking for, and math met the growth that they were looking for. And so that might mean even if you're a student that was going to score an advanced score, did your score grow as much as you were expected to hit? So if you were expected to hit a 1650, did you get there, even though the range for that advanced or pass score may have been much wider than that? You can see that our students do perform in that area. So that's the national and state data that we're going to continue to work through. But Ms. Boustet is going to work us through the local assessments and benchmarks.
So we have been working really hard in trying to create some systems and structure to some of the local assessments that and benchmarks that we would like to do this year. If you remember last year, we did have some teachers when we presented Linkit We did have some teachers who had piloted Linkit as a benchmark last year, and we found great success with it with the information that we had received. So the next part of our presentation, we're going to provide you with information about our local benchmarks, our local assessments, and what we're doing with them and how those different benchmarks can really help us to tell the story of what is happening in our classrooms with our curriculum and how we're meeting the needs of all of our students in our buildings. So what I want to share first is just explaining what assessments we are giving to specific grade levels. So one of the systems that we put into place is that we really wanted to create a structured 3 times a year when we are going to administer benchmarks to our students. So what you see on the right-hand side is our administration window, and we administer our benchmarks fall, winter, and spring. So those time periods would be September, January, and then May. There's a little bit of a difference for our high school students because of keystone testing, which I'll explain, but we really wanted to create a structure where we are really sticking to when we're administering those benchmarks, how we're providing intervention and addressing needs, and looking at what our data looks like with our teachers together. So we found, so far in September, good success with administering them, and hopefully we'll have the same in January. So when you look at kindergarten and first grade, we administer what's called the DIBLS, which is the Dynamic Indicators of Basic Literacy Skills, which I will explain on a different slide more in depth what that means and what our students are doing. And we also administer the Acadience Math Assessment, beginning math, number concepts, computation, and so forth. And again, I will explain that a little bit later. But the way in which we administer to our kindergarten and first graders is we call it a SWAT team. I know that name maybe doesn't sound so great, but it is wonderful. We take all of our reading specialists, and we take our instructional coaches and myself, and we go to each of our elementary buildings, and we administer those 2 assessments to all of our kindergartners and our first graders individually. So we go as a group so we can do 1 building a day, administer it individually so we have that data. And we found that it was very successful and can get that information quickly for all of our students and really could delve into it to make the best decisions that we could for them. We will administer that fall, winter, and spring to all of our kindergarten students and first grade. Through 2nd through 8th grade, we will administer the Linkit benchmark assessments in ELA and math, and again, during those 3 benchmarking windows. For K through 5 students, we also add another piece of data, which is our BAS testing, which is our benchmark assessment systems, which we have been administering in the district for a number of years. For 6th through 8th grade, we are, like we had said, doing still the Linkit benchmark assessments in ELA and math. And in 9th through 10th grade, we are giving Keystone-specific Linkit benchmarks. So in 9th grade, our students are taking ELA and math, but in 10th grade, they are taking Keystone-specific English, biology, or Algebra 1, and biology. So to give you a little background of what the DIBLS and Acadience screeners look like. So DIBLS, like I had stated, is Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. It's assessing those basic beginning literacy skills that our students, our kindergartners, and our first graders are coming in with. So when we're looking at DIBLS, we're looking at letter naming fluency. Can they identify the letters? Can they identify the sounds? Can they do what's called phoneme segmentation? So, if I give them the word cat, can they go k, at? Can they break it apart to hear those different phonemes, those different sounds? We also assess them with nonsense word fluency, giving them a word that is not a real word, and can they use their letter naming sounds, their phoneme skills to break that word apart and really read it. As they get into first grade, we look at word reading fluency and we look at oral reading fluency as well. For Acadience math screening, and I put a little blurb on there, which I won't read to you, that comes right from Acadience, but we're looking at their early numeracy skills. We're looking at computation and problem solving. So we look at asking a student, if I give you 2 numbers or if I give you 2 dots on a die, which one is more? We also ask them to identify numbers. So we will ask them, to read numbers and see how far that they can go in a series of numbers within a minute's time. We ask them next number fluency, missing number fluency. So can they tell which number is missing in a series? And then in first grade, looking at basic computation and how far can they go in our basic computation skills. So what you see on the chart or on the slide in front of you is just a quick snapshot of what our baseline data looks like for kindergartners who are coming in to Upper Dublin. And this was in September, right at, I would say the last 2 weeks of September. So when you look at the kindergarten DIBELS information, that blue and green category is what we call core support. Those students are doing what they need to do, they have those skills, and they are successful with receiving the support that they are getting within their classroom. When we're looking at the yellow and the red, our yellow group may need some little reinforcement, not intensive, and then our red is that intensive support. So we want to look at those students and decide what kind of support do they maybe need. Maybe they need support from a reading specialist, and what that looks like moving forward for them. What I will say about kindergarten, when you look at that pie, it's almost like that even split. And that is fairly normal because our students, our kindergarten students, are coming in with varied experiences. They're coming in with different experiences in different preschools or different home experiences. So this is just baseline data. And what our kindergarten teachers are doing, along with our lovely reading specialists, is they're doing those letter sounds. And they're doing the letter identification and teaching our students right now until our January benchmark, how do we break those sounds apart to make words. On the right-hand side, you see our Acadian's math data for kindergarten. And again, the blue is above benchmark, green is at benchmark, yellow is below, and red is well below. Again, with kindergarten, they're coming in with varied experiences. And so we understand that it's our job in kindergarten to teach those skills and to see where they are come January with some of the instruction that they've been given. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what our Linkit benchmark assessments look like as a summary report, and to give you a little background as to what our Linkit benchmarks are. So Linkit benchmarks are end of year standards. So they assess skills and topics that we expect our students to have mastered by the end of that grade level. So when you take a look at the charts that are sitting right next to the words on the left, you can see that, the average score for the third grade math Linkit was 52.5%. And then for the ELA on the right, also 52.7%. That is purely a baseline. For our teachers, it's a great indicator of where their students are coming in with the standard skills and topics that we expect them to master at the end of the school year. So when you look at some of the bars at the top, the one bar that I want to point out is that orange group. So if you look, there's 17% in ELA grade 3. What Linkit does, it identifies our bubble students. It identifies students that could go either way. Students, that maybe could score proficient or advanced, or maybe could also score basic. So we really are paying attention to the students and their baseline and how they're performing. What are the skills and topics that are really showing to us in our curriculum what we need to focus on as we move through the school year. But again, we told our teachers, and of course we tell our parents, don't be alarmed with the numbers that you see on here right now. This is truly a baseline. We don't expect our fourth graders or third graders to come in knowing these standards and skills and topics because we haven't taught them yet. And that's our job. We will do that throughout the year, and then hopefully in January, we're gonna see some significant growth as we go through. On this slide, we wanted to share with you our BAS, our BAS data. So BAS is our benchmark assessment system, which is through Fontes and Pinnell. For third grade, beginning of the year, we have 80% of our third graders who are meeting or exceeding the benchmark just in September. And then you can look at that 12% and that 8%, the approaching and below. And what we have done is we are working with our reading specialists to work with students with tiered interventions for students who need a little bit more support. This is just one piece of data that we use to identify where the support needs to be for our third graders. What we've also done is provided some diagnostics for our students, one of them being the core phonics assessment that our reading specialists have administered to really pinpoint what do we need to work on with those students to really help them be successful. And just to kind of go back to this before I move on, with our benchmark assessment system, we will administer that again, not in January. We will administer that at the end of the school year for all students, but we will administer it to our students who are receiving intervention in January at that winter benchmark. But we can administer the BAS to any student at any time during the year if we wanted to see growth, or if we wanted to see if a student is starting to struggle and where we can help that student be successful. So as Dave had showed in the beginning of the presentation, he showed this wonderful image of data and how that explained with the story is so important. And one of the things that we're doing this year is we're holding data meetings after each of our benchmark windows to really discuss the information that we're seeing through the Linkit benchmarks, through Dibbles, and through Acadians. So that last part explained with the story, when I'm doing data meetings with specific grade levels, I'm really focusing on that. We can look at the data and see the raw numbers and the raw scores, but what's the story? Our teachers know our students best that are sitting in front of them, so we need them to help us create that full picture. So both our elementary and secondary buildings are holding data meetings, either as grade levels or as departments over the course of the school year. At the elementary level, we are piloting data meetings, a longer, more systematic and formalized agenda with the data meeting with one grade level in each elementary building. And I'm walking through that with the principal and also with the grade level teachers, special education teachers, counselors, our lovely supervisors who are there with us as well, and our instructional coaches. So we're all looking at that together as a team, having conversations about what we're noticing, what are areas that we really want to focus in on, what are areas that we feel that our students are being successful and maybe we can push a little bit more, and what data are we seeing that will help us to identify things in our curriculum that we can help, address different instructional practices within our classrooms. Our fall data meetings, when we looked at the Linkit data, was truly a baseline. So it was just telling us, these are end of year standards, end of year skills and topics, but what stood out to us. So we went through that process with them, and we're looking forward to, in January, really looking at that growth. So where were our students in September, and then what are we seeing come January with the same assessment? Our January data meetings give us time, or let me go back. So in September, when we had our data meetings, we now had 12 plus weeks of full instruction before we're giving that benchmark again in January. And for any of our students who really needed some intervention, they were also getting 12 weeks of intervention with a reading specialist or getting that support within the classroom as well. So one thing I wanted to share with everyone is these are just two quick examples of a data pre-meeting sheet and then also a data meeting agenda. We're utilizing these in all of our grade levels and all of our buildings to help our teachers to start to think through the data. So the form that you see on the left is a form that we provided to all of our buildings, to all of our teachers, to have them to start sifting through their baseline data and putting down their noticing, their wonderings, their areas of growth, what is standing out, what are areas of curriculum that they feel that they need to focus on. And they're bringing that to the data meeting so we can have meaningful conversations about what they're seeing. The form on the right is our data meeting agenda that we're using with our pilot groups. And what we're going to do is we'll continue to work through that agenda. We will spend a great deal of time talking about our Tier 1 instruction, which is the instruction that all of our students are receiving. And then we will also have conversations about students who maybe need Tier 2 or Tier 3 support based upon the data and based upon the conversations through those data meetings. We will provide a time for our staff to provide feedback about these data meetings so that we can make adjustments moving forward into the next school year. So we want to hear what they're thinking, what they're feeling about the data meetings that we're holding, really for, I don't want to say for the first time, I think in the district we've held data meetings before, but we're really trying to put these systems and structures in place so that we can do these 3 times a year. One other example I wanted to share with you is not only when you use Linkit do you see that summary report, but the power behind Linkit is when you can dig down deeper into those skills and into those topics, and you can really see how our students are doing in those specific skills and topics. So what you see is an example of specific questions from an ELA benchmark grade 4 item analysis, and you can see how many received the right score, got the answer correct, the percentage, and what the percentage is for each of those questions. But what is so powerful is you can click that question as the teacher, you can read that question, it provides you even with detail and information of why maybe your students chose the answer that they did, and how you can share with your students why that answer is the correct answer. You can even dig down even deeper by student. So I could pull up an item analysis for a specific student and dig deeper into how that student did, what questions they got correct, what they got incorrect, seeing how many questions they asked for a specific skill or topic. It has been a really powerful tool when you can dig a little bit deeper into your class. You can dig deeper for myself into a grade level. Our teachers are able to display some of these questions to show students where they went wrong or where they went right and did very well. So I think there's a lot of power besides the summary report, but when we can dig deeper into the skills and topics and identify it. And I think come January, when we can see the growth and see where those skills and topics are areas we need to focus, it's even more powerful.
Just one of the things I wanted to jump in on this slide. Last spring, when we were piloting these, we noticed in some cases that when Bridget was mentioning digging into students, we were noticing, we thought student X, the score was a little suspicious. And you start to look at it by standard, you start to look at it by depth of knowledge or by skill. But when you actually clicked into the assessment, you saw the last 6 or 7 questions were red. The color red. So they really, at the end of the test, went, I can't do this anymore, and they were selecting questions as opposed to really working through. So there were opportunities then for that teacher to say, look, your score wasn't basic. You kind of needed a break at the end. And so what strategy can we use when we get there? And let's take a look at those 6 questions again and really see, was that a skill or standard that was needed versus do we need to work on that kind of grit and forget the word every time. I'm looking at Jen. We all stamina. We every one ed committee cycle we forget that word, but that stamina piece that we need to keep building for our students.
So, I wanted to share with you, coming out of two of our data meetings, our pilot groups, we had wonderful conversations about the data, about our students, and about our instruction, and I wanted to share with you 2 examples that really highlight the things that they noticed and what are some of those strategies that we're going to focus on between that September benchmark until January. So at Maple Glen, our pilot group is kindergarten, and we had lots of conversations, of course, about literacy, but we really focused on the number sense and students really needing to know that, to have an understanding of that number sense, and how can we develop that as teachers. So what we decided to focus on with some targeted strategies, we decided that they need some routines to practice the number sense. They need some interactive games, which our instructional coaches have been instrumental in helping to model and helping to work with our kindergarten teachers for those. Developing learning centers, using illustrative math. Our kindergarten at Maple Glen is piloting now illustrative math, and they're seeing some great results with that and their number sense. They also have received a UDEF Innovative Grant for some of the centers that we use to practice number sense and also to practice some of our math skills as well. And like I had said, they are definitely working with our instructional coaches, if not daily, weekly, coming in and helping to provide some other activities and strategies to build that number sense capacity. At Fort Washington with our 5th grade, there were 2 areas that came up. One was diverse media, and setting was an area that came up that we really wanted to focus in on. Now, Linkit calls it diverse media, but it's really text features. So charts and graphs in a nonfiction piece, maybe it's a picture with a caption, and how do our students read those nonfiction pieces differently than they may read a fiction piece. So we talked about exposing our students to a variety of questions and question types, because with the setting area of focus, we noticed that our students really did understand setting. They knew, when we asked them in class, they knew how to identify setting, but it came back to they might not have understood what that question was asking them and the way it was worded on that assessment. So the way that we're addressing that is giving some practice on multiple choice kind of questions, whether that's once a day or once a week, just giving the familiarity with a multiple choice type of question and what that looks like and how do we attack that. Because we knew our students understood setting. We knew that they understood it when our teachers were teaching it, but they weren't performing as high in that one skill. We also are looking at deconstructing those questions. We're looking at reading and analyzing text features through various different nonfiction pieces. How do we break that apart and read that differently than when I'm reading a fiction piece? And then again, working with our instructional coaches and myself to really develop different strategies and things that they can implement within their classrooms. So we have a few next steps in our journey with our local assessments and our benchmark data. So we're going to be continuing to have data meetings at all of our grade levels after our January benchmarks, and then of course at the end of the year when we see have they mastered those topics and skills for that grade level. We're going to continue to disaggregate the data. We're going to action plan. We're going to look at, when we see that benchmark data, do we need to look at our curriculum and address things in our curriculum to make sure that we're hitting those topics and standards? Or do we need to look at our practices in our classroom and, change it up or vary some of the things that we're doing there? In January, we're going to compare our growth measures, how we did in the fall to how we're doing in the winter. We're going to look at, strengthening our Tier 1, that general experience for all students, and targeting our Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions to what they need. So when we're looking at the data, we're addressing skills and topics that our students need, that maybe they need addressed to be successful. We're going to continue to refine our use of win time at the elementary level, ARP at the middle level, and then office hours at the high school. So when I talk about win at the elementary level, we want to think about what do our students need based upon the data and what they're seeing in the classroom. Can we mix up some of our students, right? And one teacher is taking students that really need to work on main idea, and maybe another teacher is taking students that really need to work on fractions or something of that nature. So how can we be creative in using that win time to really address students' needs and to really give them what they need to move forward? And then finally, we're going to gather feedback on the data protocol and our benchmarks in January. And then of course, we'll do that again at the end of the year to hear feedback from our staff and our administrators to see what we need to do moving forward.
So that concludes our presentation, and we'll open it to questions in just a moment. But hopefully you saw as we worked through that national and state piece is really important to us from the point of informing where our curriculum revisions look, where our global kind of trends as a district look, but it's more of a reactive piece of data that we look at it, those assessments from March, April, May, the following summer and fall. But hopefully you saw through Bridget's section of the presentation that local data is used immediately. It's student specific, it's not always just a big grade level overview, but it allows us to immediately plan for the kids in front of us. And you have our commitment as teaching and learning team that we will be utilizing our benchmark window to continue to come back to Education Committee for a winter and a spring update as we continue to look at that growth and continue to unpack that story for you all. So we'll open up to questions from the committee.
Yeah, and before we get to questions, I'm going to ask that people keep the questions brief, and if you have additional questions, that we could communicate by email, since if we're looking at the clock, everybody has other things to do as well. So if there are any quick questions, by all means do. And otherwise, I'm going to ask that people will communicate those directly with Mr. Hoffman and Ms. Poustet. And if you could also copy me on it so I can keep track of those questions.
Couple. I
Yeah,
wanna be the
Dr. Thomas,
person
go
asking
ahead.
questions
Yeah.
at a late meeting. I was wondering if there's a percentage of students with IEPs who take AP exams, and do you know that number?
Not off the top of my head, but I can get that for you.
Okay, and then also, do we have students who have dual enrollment, and does that impact AP exams?
We do have dual enrollment in most of our content areas, and I don't believe here the way that our dual enrollment is set up that it necessarily competes with our AP courses as it does in some districts.
And then I'm just wondering how local data is disseminated to parents. As a parent in the district with 3 different grade levels, I felt like that information was disseminated a little more thoroughly in the past than it seems to be current. I don't know if that's just because my kids are a little bit older, but I just wanted to ask that question.
Yes, the local assessments, we do have the Link It Parent Guardian portal that we'll be continuing to work with. Our goal last year was to get as many parents into that portal as possible with historical data. We'll continue to utilize that portal for sharing some of our local data. Why it's not there right now is this is our first time using some of these data pieces, and we want to be really confident about what it says so we don't alarm a parent getting a 52% on a benchmark at the beginning of the year when really that's an indicator of where they are on end of year before any teaching even really occurs. So students' parents are always the best, the student's teacher is always the best person to address any of those kind of local observations in our progress reports.
Any other questions? Yeah, Ms. Evans.
Not on the committee, but I do have a question. So the one area that maybe I hone in on the most, just because it's a graduation requirement, right, is the Keystone scores. And so one of the questions I have is about a lot of the data mining that you kind of talked about is understandably so kind of student focused, right? What are the areas that they need supports in? But what about kind of teacher level data, right? Are we tracking, and I could see you going, kind of layers back even, right? So not just, okay, who was your Algebra 1 teacher, right? But who did you have in elementary school, right? And kind of tracking for trends there so that, and I love our teachers. This is not to criticize teachers, but everybody can use additional supports, right? So if we notice a particular trend, I mean, is that stuff we're looking at as well?
It is part of the data story, right? That tells a story for us, and we tend to look at that as well, not so much of where is that deficit, but where do we see kind of those paths where we see student profiles that we see a lot of success with a certain type of student, which Lincoln's able to do for us to really look at what is the quality of a student that gets a certain percentage on a certain assessment at this point, and then we can peel back from there. We can look at course sequencing, we can look at teachers, and obviously, PVOS and others do look at teacher growth over 3 years, and that is a piece of the discussion that principals have with their teachers as well.
All right. 2 quick questions. The big picture for math in the high school, we get our 23% of the 91 students. Are we doing anything to help the 70 or so percent who aren't there at that time? I mean, I understand that's the end of 11th grade, right? So in senior year, is there is there anything that we're doing for them?
So, yep, two brief
Together.
comments. So as a reminder that these data points are data on students, at the end of this, their time here. And so we've implemented things that aren't reflected in the data necessarily. So these groups of students are the students that had an abbreviated Math 7 or pre-algebra class, and then the hybrid course upon return, on top of the D tracking that occurred on top of all of that, and illustrative coming through. So it's a heavy group to look through. What we have done is look at math pathways for Algebra 1 at the high school. So of these 91 students, was Algebra 1 the right spot for that student coming into high school? Or this year we are implementing illustrative math as 2 other classes that really takes linear and equations are 2 different Algebra 1 focus courses. And so they'll actually take that at the end of a 2-year Algebra 1 cycle. The other piece that we've looked at that oftentimes, and it indirectly addresses some of Mary Beth's other question, which is the special education and the impact of that, are math students who were in replacement instruction for many years at our middle school were really over here in a separate math course. And we've worked to get our illustrative math as the focus for our replacement math instruction at all of our secondaries. So those entry points are going to come right back for our students. And grade level standards and course standards are course standards, regardless of if you're in general education or special education math. We've done a lot of work with our teachers on that. So I think those things are absolutely going to address that. And then the last piece is the math lab course that we started when our new high school schedule was adopted, that we are able to kind of target those students. And rather than going from Algebra 1, Algebra 2, some of them are taking Algebra 1 geometry with math lab so that we can hone in on that algebra skill prior to taking the next level of algebra and then that retest.
Great, thank you. And then a quick question on the link at the benchmark assessments, that graph, those 2 bar chart or histogram distributions. There are a couple, there's a number of kids who already at the beginning of the year score like in that very tail end in the 90 to 100. What's happening with them?
We're talking a lot, and that's an important piece of data, right? So that we know that, there were a handful of students that when the scores came back, they're in that 100% range. Now, it's scored in a way that takes that into consideration as a Form A, but it's certainly a piece of data that we then use to make sure that we are accelerating learning for every kid every day. So that is a piece of data that the teams talk through, just as they would talk through what are the interventions that are needed for certain students. In some cases they found, a certain topic that they cover a lot is already pretty reflected. And so they're having to make some choices about how they plan their instruction for the whole class or individuals.
I just jump in real quick. So even if those students are scoring in that advanced range, when we dug a little bit deeper, their percentage, because it's a Form A, may have been 62%, but it's still falling in that advanced range for the beginning of the year. So there definitely, when we dug deeper, there was definitely skills and topics that we wanted to address with those students. But then how do we accelerate for some of those skills and topics that they really did really well in? And we can do that through some of our stations and through some of our instruction that we're doing in our classroom.
Just one quick comment.
Yeah.
I feel like this does need to get said that, it's not what we teach, it's what the students learn. I truly believe that this is the right work. Training and supporting staff members to drill down to item analysis is certainly best practice. So I just want to encourage these efforts.
Right, let's move on then and thank you again for putting this together, because I think this is really a wonderful baseline to have and for us to really see the growth over the year and actually do, make adjustments as we go instead of waiting till the end of the year and then hope everything will turn out. So that's a great progress there. Let's go to item B on the agenda, which is the donation from Corbett of our K1 or furniture.
Missed service.
Oh, sorry. Yes, apologies. So let's do the service agreement. We have, this is Montgomery County IU. And are there any comments on that from the administration?
No comments.
No comments. Is this an annual? This is an annual thing. Yeah. All right. So we are moving that on to the legislative agenda. Then the donation.
This is to accept the donation of goods and in the situation furniture that I mentioned as part of the STEM update. This is for the Jarretttown U Design Labs. So we have U Design Labs that are going to be installed beginning next week in each of the 4 elementary schools in recognition of the ongoing innovation, positive change, and collaboration in the district, and to show appreciation and understanding of delay of a few items during our Sandy Run installation. Corbett and KI is gifting us with $26,618.40 of furniture to outfit the entire Jarretttown lab.
All right. And I don't see that we have to do any action on this other than to acknowledge and appreciate, and then it will show up on the legislative agenda. Yeah, to accept the donation, and this is, Jarretttown is getting it, but the 3 other elementary schools are also getting that. But this was this discussed last month.
And we're utilizing Ready to Learn funds for the other 3 schools.
All right, conferences. Any comments on the conferences?
No, these are all standing items that we have some student conferences and some.
Yeah, I think I had one question on the last one for the business teachers. One was.
They're going to share a lodging.
Yeah.
They're going to share.
Okay. All right. Any other comments? No, seeing none. Then we'll move that on to the legislative agenda. Student activities.
Yes, same. Student activities, we have our 2 annual trips for our select choirs at the elementary level. We're working these are coming up this week and next. We're working with the state to try to get this information early enough every year, but the dates just are never released as early as we'd like. And the other are student activities, athletics, and business education.
Any questions, comments? All right, we can move that on, and I'm sure that the Harrisburg tour will be quite exciting, and that is happening on Friday for the Jarretttown chorus, right? Okay, and that gets us to let me see, public participation. Just like all our public participation, if you have a question or comment to the board, please come to the microphone, state your name, where in the district you live, and you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Dr. Joan Frizzell, live in Stewart Creek Farm, recently retired from teaching pathophysiology and pharmacology in a university. So I really appreciate seeing that math scores are proficient, science scores, particularly biology, are proficient. You need to know bio to do well in pathophys and pharmacology. English language arts skills, well, you have to write well to read the papers that they have to read and to write. Based on earlier meeting today and listening to comments of parents, what you have here is a lot of good information for what we refer to as intelligent quotient. What I'm concerned about after listening to parents around this room is something we refer to as emotional quotient that is needed for students to learn academic content. They need to feel safe, they need to feel comfortable, They need to feel that neither their faith nor their ethnic background is something that will enable them to be bullied, pushed aside, or not receiving full instructional information. And it's something that I really would like to ask the educational committee to think about. What are we doing with the students to teach them not to be biased, not to have something written on a bathroom wall like was previously written, not to have parents come up and cry and say, we are really afraid for what this is doing to our kids emotionally. Because if you're in academia, and I know some of you are, that if a student doesn't feel safe, has been bullied, is uncomfortable, their mind wanders in class, and they don't get the academic content that they need. So what can be done to support those students so they're not adversely affected by what's happening internationally? Thank you.
I'll just hold it. Jenny Patel Ambler. And this is a public meeting. I'm sorry that it's 9 o'clock at night, but I do appreciate questions to be asked. Our staff has done tremendous work coming up with all that data and all that information. And so I think a robust conversation about that and questions is publicly should be welcomed, regardless of the time of the meeting. I just want to say that the 95% of participation on those tests, I think one way, and I know that they do this at Fort Washington, is everyone's really encouraged to do it, because if we do well on this, then our school looks good. And of course, some people don't want to take tests, whatever. But if some people are like, oh, it doesn't matter, who cares, it doesn't matter, I don't get a grade for it. So if that mentality or that presentation on why these tests are important to families, maybe we won't have to deal with going below that 95%, you know, because I feel like the kids are like, oh, this is like my own daughter, this is so stupid, why do we have to do this, right? But I'm like, you do it because it's good for the school, it tells where you are, and it helps our district to know where everybody stands. So if we present it that way, maybe we'll get more participation. The AP exam, I know a lot of people ask me, you know, it's tough that those numbers are coming from seniors only because the senioritis kicks in, and they also aren't 100% sure whether that AP result is going to be meaningful in their college career. What's the point? Was kind of what seniors talked about last year. I experienced that with my own child. I insisted he take 2 of his 4, and he did well, and he actually got credit for it in his college freshman year. So to all the parents that might be still up or look at this, it is worth it. Encourage your seniors to take that test. Yeah, standardized tests don't tell the whole picture, but it is something, and it is a good quality or educational tool for kids to learn how to take a test, which you mentioned too. You're teaching them how to take a multiple choice test, so that you might know the content. You're just misreading how the A, B, and C options are telling you, and you might know it, and it's a skill to have. I do have some concern that our scores seem to be lower than our peer districts. And I don't know how you feel about that. And they were picked, those peer districts were chosen because they matched us more similarly in size and demographics and everything else. So curious why we tend to be, it appears to be on the lower end of that. And if we've looked into maybe some of those whys. I still remain very concerned that there's a teacher in middle school that is still giving a survey that is quite personal. I have brought this up for over a year now. I don't even have a kid at Sandy Run anymore, but I'm being told that it's still happening. This is one teacher asking every single child a survey, questions that gets pretty personal in some of them. I think a survey like this, we've decided as a district, if it's a district-wide survey, parents are notified, blah, 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 we know about it. But at a school level, this at least seems to be, it should be approved and presented from the principal and through guidance. Not one particular teacher shouldn't be able to take this into their own hands and administer this questionnaire without parents' knowledge. The children have a tendency to feel nervous because it's a teacher asking them to answer these questions, and they feel pressured to answer. And I just don't think it's appropriate. And I really, really want us to do something about that. And I'm not saying you can't have the survey. I'm just saying it should be more transparent. It should be coming from guidance or the principal at least. And And I have to say that the seniors last year, they went through Eureka change in 4th grade. And then they also were in COVID at the end of their 9th grade year and their entirety of their 10th grade year. So maybe that is part of the reason why some of those numbers aren't as great as they could have been. And it was a really smart grade. I know a couple of our board members had seniors last year, and they were a really smart, great group of kids. Thanks.
Seeing no one else coming to the microphone, I will close public participation. We did receive some input for this meeting, but that really pertained very much to the reorg meeting. So, but board members have access to that. Does anybody have any comments?
I would just say regarding the peer districts that that's something Dr. Smith and I spoke about the other day, that just as any piece of data is a piece of data, we both need to look at, we need to look at both our peer district performance, but also it's worth looking at our peer districts as districts change. Are we still aligned? Would we still be considered peer districts if we relooked at that list? So that is something that we want to look at as well. And I would say that hopefully that story lens of the data presentation really is hoping to show that all of those things about kids and kids being able to receive what we hope they can learn is part of what we do. We always say Maslow before Bloom. We teach that, we preach that, and I know that our teachers take that seriously.
Anything else? All right, then I will let you know that the next meeting will be on Thursday, January 4th. So not Wednesday, but Thursday, 6 p.m. Oh,
I'm sorry, could you say that again? Talk about the board meeting dates? We do have a draft together for the 2024 calendar that I will share out in the director's briefing to get some feedback, but pretty much they are very similar to what they have been with the certain days of the month and the time still remaining at 6 o'clock. Correct, Mr. Sirota?
I think so, and I think for the policy and education next month, we did talk about Thursday? Why don't we call it TBD and we'll.
okay.
Yeah,
All right.
sticking with Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
The
mean, I would think that unless, well,
Yeah.
we can talk about that. All right. So without further comments, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you, and a policy will follow shortly after. Thanks very much.